Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be talking about the AT3 Tactical RCO Red Dot. But before we get into the video, if you want to help me out personally, you can, of course, like, share, and subscribe because all that sort of stuff is free and does help out quite a bit. Also, go ahead and comment literally anything down below. Now, there's also my website, Focus Shooting LLC, where I sell some of my Mark up receivers. I believe I only have the Mark 1 in stock currently, but we're working on getting more in very soon. Now, on top of that, there's also Subscribestar, which is basically just a pro to a Patreon. Now, with all of that out of the way, full disclosure on the AT3 Tactical RCO is that they have sent this one out to me. They've sent a few other optics out to me. Recently, I did a review on their Red Tail, which is their 1:4x LPVO. They also have a 1:6x LPVO, and they also sent me out their RO, which is more of a pistol-sized red dot, though again, we'll get into that one there a little bit later on. Now, on top of that, I believe I also have an affiliate link for them, and I believe I make 10% commission off of it, so anytime you buy something using my link, I will make 10% of whatever that purchase is. Now, that being said, if you ever have a question about any of my affiliates, go ahead and check out the website in the affiliate section. It has every single affiliate that I've ever worked with and exactly what I make from each one for true full disclosure. Getting into some specifics on the AT3 RCO, it is basically a budget version or the Trijicon MRO at home. So we have a 25mm objective lens, which is a little bit bigger, a little bit nicer than the smaller 20mm that you're going to find on basically every micro style optic on the market. It also uses Trijicon MRO mounts. So you might notice that I have it in a non-standard mount. That is because the AT3 RCO mount that it came with stripped out at about 30 inch-pounds. Now, currently the mount that I have on it is the UTG MRO mount. It's a very inexpensive mount. I believe it's $25 depending on where you get it from. This one here is a lower 1/3 co-witness, though it even has a riser plate that would bump it up a little bit more if you wanted to, but this one here is currently torqued down to 45 inch-pounds and is a little bit higher quality than the one that they sent. The one that they sent is fine, but the hardware and some of the other features on it leave a little bit to be desired in terms of total strength. So, moving on to the optic itself, we do have a forged housing, which is very nice. So this was, machined from a forging rather than a billet. Forging is going to give you a little bit better strength and durability, especially when you're dealing with something like this. Now, these sorts of optics bodies are incredibly strong, micro style red dots, even 30mm red dots, because they're basically a solid aluminum hull. They're very, very strong. That being said, the optic itself is fairly lightweight, coming in at 4.6 ounces. So even though you do get a larger 25mm window, you're not really sacrificing all that much in terms of weight. Now, it is a matte anodized aluminum finish. All of that is quite nice. The glass itself has very little tint to it, has a little bit of that blue-green tint in certain lighting conditions, but when you're outside in like direct sunlight, it looks very, very good. I can't speak to its night vision performance, though it does have night vision settings. Now, as you might have also noticed, we do of course have exposed elevation and windage knobs. The elevation is quite nicely protected in kind of a aluminum shroud, and the windage is kind of protected from impacts by the right side battery tray. So if it falls on the right side, it's actually going to land on the battery tray, usually depending on how it falls, before it falls on the windage knob. This one here did, of course, go through a double drop test, but we will get into that a little bit later. Now, to cycle through our 9 daylight settings and our 2 night vision settings, so there's actually 11 different settings in total, should you need them. You, of course, have up and down rubberized buttons. They're quite nice and tactile. They use a decent amount of force to adjust. I never had any issues with them whatsoever. Usually when I'm outdoors, which is something we'll talk about, I had this pinned to maximum brightness. Now, battery life on this optic is rated at 50,000 hours using, modern LED technology. However, that is at the lowest daylight setting. Now, usually when I'm outside, I have this on the maximum daylight setting, and I can tell you that the battery life is quite a bit lower because in the 6 months or so that I've had this optic, this is actually the second battery. It just died on me recently, so this is the second battery that I've had to put in the RCO. Now, in my opinion, the main draw for most people to the AT3 RCO is a combination of its big window, its 25mm window, which is preferable to a 20mm window. I know it's just a personal preference, but myself personally and a lot of other people do just like larger windows, and I do like the larger window on here, but also in combination with its reticle. It sort of has a kind of EOTech donative death reticle. It looks a little bit different and it's a little bit more interesting. It's not necessarily better, but you have a center 2 MOA dot, and then you have a 62 MOA outer circle. I'm not sure why they went with 62 versus 65. 65 is more analogous to an actual human at 100 yards. 62 obviously is a little bit smaller than that. The reticle is differentiated enough, but again, it serves basically the same purpose. Up close, basically just put the reticle on somebody and pull the trigger, and then at longer ranges, you can kind of bracket targets and stuff like that, should you ever need to do something like that with the RCO. Now, I will say that in perfect conditions, the reticle is very crisp, it's very nice, and on maximum brightness outside, it is very usable, it's very fast up close, that sort of thing. However, the LED emitter does have a few quirks to it. So the first one is that when you're not at maximum brightness, the LED emitter has a very, very obvious refresh rate issue. So let's say if it's at maximum brightness, let's say the refresh rate is 120 Hertz or 120 times per second, looks very smooth, very, very good. As soon as you step it off of maximum brightness, your refresh rate goes down to like 90, 75, 60, and lower and lower and lower. So at the lower brightness settings, say the indoor brightness settings, you get a very, very choppy red dot when you're looking through it, transitioning to targets at close range, that sort of thing. Now, if you're not worried about shooting in mixed lighting conditions, if this is basically just a plinking optic for you that you're going to be using during the daytime and nothing else, then you're going to pin it to maximum brightness and you're going to be fine with it. Though it is worth noting that at the lower brightness settings, it does have a very obvious emitter issue. Now, the second issue that I have with the emitter is that even at maximum brightness in direct sunlight, usually where I shoot is direct sunlight plus rocks, which, you know, reflects light, that sort of thing, making it a little bit brighter even, it's very soft. It's not unusable, but it is very soft. Usually, myself personally, I like to have it maybe like one step above where I absolutely need it to actually see it, maybe 1 or 2 steps above. And this is at that, what I would consider minimum acceptable daylight bright reticle. So it's not fire bright. It's not like you're knocking it down 2 or 3 settings like you would on some other red dots. With the emitter that they currently have in the RCO, it is a little bit too dim, not unusable, and if you're somebody who prefers to have your red dot on the lowest visible setting for the most precision, that sort of thing, maybe you'll like this, but for most people, I would imagine that it is going to be a little bit too dim in certain lighting conditions. If you're somewhere where you're always shooting in overcast or with tree cover, and it's not just, you know, direct burning sunlight like where I usually shoot, then it's probably not that big of an issue for you. Now, a couple other minor issues, and these are pretty minor issues, so take these with a grain of salt, that I have with the RCO, is that sometimes when you have your head in not the perfect position, or you're looking at through the optic at a bit of an angle, you can get a little bit of a ghost or a halo effect with the reticle itself at maximum brightness, which is again kind of the minimum acceptable brightness outside. You can get a little bit of a halo effect or kind of a secondary reticle that looks slightly above the reticle in the optic itself, and it looks a little fuzzy, a little hazy, and kind of like the reticle is stretching in a certain direction, which can happen with a lot of red dots, and a lot of red dots do have this issue. But when you have a 65 MOA circle, or 62 MOA circle in this case, and it starts doing that over the entire the center 2 MOA dot, it can be a bit of an issue. But again, that was something I only noticed when shooting from odd or different positions. You would get a little bit of that halo effect, and it would look like there's kind of a couple reticles, or the single reticle kind of just stretched out a little bit. Some other things that I do know that they're not using particularly high quality coatings. For instance, if you're looking at this reticle from the front, not only can you see the very obvious emitter position, but sometimes you can actually see a reverse reflection of the reticle through the front of the glass. So the glare reduction and some of the other issues that come along with sort of cheaper coatings or worse glass design are fairly obvious in this optic. Not that that's something you won't see in other optics as well, but again, it's just something worth pointing out. Now, with all of that being said, the optic, I believe, comes in at a starting price of $150, $160 with a mount, of course. Now, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, the mount itself is not all that great, so I would recommend changing that out even to another budget MRO style mount. On the website, it says it does not mention that they are MRO compatible. I actually talked with one of their engineers about this optic. He was very kind to go on like a 20-30 minute phone call with me about this optic, because I did have some issues with it, and I do like to actually talk to the companies and hopefully try and get some of those issues resolved for people who go out and buy these optics. So as of right now, the RCO is not in a very good place. It's a very good idea and design, but again, it's more expensive than a lot of other red dots that kind of do the same thing. But do them better and with fewer issues. Like a SIG Romeo 5 is $100, you know. And could I recommend the AT3 over a SIG Romeo 5? Probably not. That being said, they are aware of the issues with the emitter and some of the other issues going into the RCO, and there will be a Gen 2 version. I believe there's no like release date on that, but it is something that is at least in plans for the future. Now, I like the idea of having a mid-priced 25mm objective lens using an MRO mount. It's different than your standard, you know, T2 mount that everything else uses, and it is a little bit different of a optic design as well. In my opinion, this is definitely a design that has merit and definitely needs a Gen 2 to improve, like say the emitter, make it a little bit brighter at maximum brightness. I should say that this does have a 6-hour shut off, but not an auto shut on or an auto turn on. So that is something that also could be added in the future. That's kind of standard now for this price range. So what I would like to see is a little bit of an improved emitter. They can keep the reticle design the same. Honestly, I like the reticle. It's simple, it's fast, up close. I don't have any issues with that whatsoever. A little bit more powerful of an emitter, a little bit smoother of an emitter, so as you go up and down the brightness settings, you don't get a intermittent or slower refresh rate. Maybe a little bit improved coatings and a slightly redesigned mount from the factory. And even if they're able to keep it under $200, I think that you have a very, very good red dot, or at least a well thought out sort of budget end red dot. Now, I'm a big fan of budget red dots. There's a lot of them that I really, really like. I run a lot of them personally. And this is definitely a good idea, but it's not quite there yet. Now, we do a double drop test on all of the optics that we test, or most of the optics we test, I should say. And we tested it on this gun. This is a 14.5 pistol or firearm, if you will, ballistic advantage barrel, kind of like one of my Mark III barrels. Basically, I just had an extra one laying around, so I decided to build a superlative arms piston build with that barrel. So what we did a double drop test with the optic itself, of course, after firing a 5-round control group at 36 yards. Then we do a double drop test, one on the top of the optic, one on the side of the optic, and then we fire another 5 rounds. Now, I was having some very weird flyers with this gun. I would put 3 rounds perfectly on top of each other, and then I would have like one an inch to the left and one an inch down, and I have no idea what that was from. Again, everything was torqued down more than to spec. I had the mount itself torqued down to 45, and I believe the 4 screws that go up into the RCO, I believe I had them at 15, 16 inch-pounds, something like that. So everything was torqued down properly, and we did get a little bit of horizontal shift with a couple flyers, and then I had a couple that actually landed with the original group as well. So there might have been something funky going on with this barrel, because there is some interesting stuff going on with this barrel and superlative arms piston kit. So while yes, there was some shift in point of impact, you kind of got to take that with a grain of salt, because we are running a very interesting system with a non-stock mount. So overall, like I said, I do think that the RCO is a very good idea, and it's close to being a very, very good optic. With a Gen 2, with a couple minor improvements, I think that they have a very, very good optics on their hand, especially if they can keep it at, say, under $200 and kind of compete with the SIG Romeo 7, the 7S, and other optics like that. If they can update the features a little bit better performance, that sort of thing, I think you have a very, very good deal on your hands. As it stands right now, I can't really recommend it over any other budget red dot on the market. Any of your budget Holosuns, SIGs, even some of the Vortex optics, the lower end Vortex optics, I would probably take all of them before I take the RCO. But again, I do like the idea of this kind of medium form factor red dot, little bit larger window, better reticle than like just a 2MOA dot. At least in my opinion, I do like to see the enhanced reticle, so to speak. But it really does need just a couple updates. So if a Gen 2 comes out, I would be very excited to get my hands on that, but as it stands right now, it's a bit of a miss, and I would probably pass on it. So with all of that out of the way, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you guys think of the AT3 RCO down below, and if there's any other sort of interesting form factor, budget price red dots that I should be checking out. So With that out of the way, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace off.